Tonight, we step quietly into the dim streets of a medieval town as the day gives way to darkness. The noise of the market has faded, leaving behind a calm and steady silence. In these hours, a single figure walks the walls and narrow lanes, keeping watch while the town sleeps. This is what an ordinary night felt like for a medieval town watchman. The sun sinks lower beyond the surrounding fields, and its final rays rest gently along the tops of the town walls. Inside those walls, the streets still hold a trace of warmth left over from the afternoon. But the air is changing. A coolness begins to creep in, predictable and slow. Shadows grow longer, stretching across packed earth and worn stone, softening the edges of doorways and the openings of narrow passages. The market square, which only hours before hummed with the steady noise of commerce, now lies in a quieter mood. Stalls have been closed or half covered. Boards lie stacked, and folded cloths wait for the next morning's work. A handful of residents finish their last tasks before night fully arrives. Timbered houses lean toward each other along the main street, their upper floors jutting out over the ground level in a familiar architectural style. Some windows remain open where the heat of the day still lingers indoors. From a few of these homes, faint sounds of domestic life continue. Wood is being stacked for the night. Dishes are set aside. Low voices move through the routines of evening. The rhythm is unhurried, almost drowsy. There is no urgency here. The town is shifting gradually from the shared activity of daylight into the private, indoor life of night. Close to the inner side of the wall, the gate stands as one of the largest structures in the town. Its heavy doors remain open for now, allowing the final stretch of daylight to pass. Fewer people move through it at this hour. A cart might roll in slowly, its wheels pressing softly into the dirt. A traveller might pause to exchange a few words with the attendant before heading toward lodging for the night. Beyond the gate, the road stretches out into fields where the color of the land is already fading into a uniform gray. Torches are not yet fully necessary, but the first small flames begin to appear along key corners. A bracket mounted on stone holds a small fire that flickers gently against the wall. The light it gives is uneven and soft. It does not push back the growing darkness so much as it marks a place where someone thought a little illumination might help after sunset. In the market square, 1 or 2 lanterns are lifted and tested. Their glass sides catch the remaining daylight before the wick is properly lit, and the flame takes hold. The night watchman moves through this transition as part of the town's expected rhythm. His presence is not unusual or theatrical. It is simply part of the same pattern that draws shutters closed and brings animals in for the night. He walks the familiar routes that run between the square, the gate, and the narrower side streets. His pace is measured and steady. There is no need to hurry while enough daylight remains to see clearly. Clothing at this hour reflects the coming cold rather than the warmth that lingered earlier. A heavier outer layer is pulled over the simpler garments worn since morning. The fabric carries the faint smell of wood smoke from earlier hours, spent near fires. Boots meet the ground with a steady, muted sound. The staff or pole carried in one hand is less a weapon than a sign of his office. It marks responsibility more than force. The grip is relaxed, the staff angled slightly forward as he walks. The walls themselves hold the last brightness longer than the streets below. Their upper stones catch the fading light, creating a pale band above the darker town. From certain angles, the sky still shows a muted color that is neither fully blue nor fully gray. This light allows clear movement without strain. Faces can still be recognized at a distance. Door latches and hinges remain visible without the need for flame. As evening deepens, household routines move toward their conclusion. Wooden shutters are drawn in one by one. The sound is distinct but soft, a brief contact of wood against frame. In some homes, a final bucket of water is poured near the doorway. In others, animals are guided into small enclosures for the night. These actions occur without coordination, yet they follow a shared understanding that night brings reduced activity outside. The watchman notes these details without stopping. His task is not to interfere with ordinary closing routines. Instead, he observes whether the general order of the town remains intact. A door left wide open might draw a longer glance. A loose hinge might be remembered for a later check. Most things appear as they should. The pattern of closure is familiar and repeats each evening with only small variations. The air grows cooler as the sun finally drops below the horizon line. The remaining light shifts quickly from soft gray to a deeper blue. Corners between buildings darken first. Narrow alleys lose their detail and become shapes rather than clear paths. The watchman adjusts by moving closer to the center of wider streets where visibility lasts a bit longer. His route accounts for this natural change, favouring open spaces before full darkness settles over the town. At the gate, the flow of movement has nearly stopped. The heavy doors remain open but ready to be closed. Their iron fittings show dull reflections from the last glow of the sky. A brief exchange between attendants confirms that no expected travellers remain on the road. The tone is routine, without urgency. The process of closing will come soon, but not before the final margin of daylight has passed completely. Lanterns begin to play a more active role now. One is lit near the square, its flame steady behind cloudy glass. Another appears along a side street, hung at shoulder height to mark a turn. The light they provide is limited, forming small circles that fade quickly into shadow. These points of illumination create a simple map of movement through the town after dark. The watchman's route passes through these markers, using them as reference points rather than relying on full visibility. The smells of the evening shift as well. Daytime scents of animals and open goods fade away. In their place come traces of cooking fires settling down and the cooler smell of damp earth. The air carries less dust as foot traffic declines. Breathing becomes easier and sounds travel a bit farther in the calmer atmosphere that night brings. Voices outside grow less frequent. A final pair of residents may cross the square, speaking quietly as they head toward their homes. Their steps are unhurried. Once they pass, the space holds a wider silence. The watchman continues across the same ground, boots tracing paths worn by many days of use. Each pass reinforces the sense that the town is moving into its night state, as expected, as it does every evening. Above, the sky darkens enough for the first faint stars to appear. They are not yet bright, but they signal the end of usable natural light. The upper edges of roofs and chimneys become darker shapes against the sky. Details that were clear moments earlier now require closer distance to distinguish. The watchman's posture remains upright and steady, conserving energy for the longer hours that lie ahead. Nothing in this transition is sudden. The town does not switch from activity to silence in a single moment. Instead, it eases into stillness through many small closures, one shutter at a time, one fading voice, one lantern lit. The watchman moves within this gradual change, maintaining a consistent pace that matches the slow settling of the environment around him. By the time the last color drains from the sky, The streets are defined mostly by memory and habit. Landmarks such as the well, the corner post near the square, and the slight bend leading toward the gate guide movement even as visibility drops. The watchman's familiarity with these features reduces the need for hesitation. Each step follows routes walked many nights before, routes that are now instinctive. The gate attendants prepare to bring the doors toward closure, testing their weight with a small shift. Hinges respond with a low, controlled sound. The action is measured and expected. No announcement is needed beyond the movement itself. The watchman observes from a short distance, confirming that the transition from open-day passage to secured night posture is proceeding as usual. The final edge of dusk gives way to early night. Lantern light now defines the usable spaces between buildings. The market square rests in partial shadow, its outlines calm and undisturbed. Most windows show only a faint interior glow, or none at all. The town has settled into the quiet structure that night requires. The watchman continues along the main route, staff touching the ground at regular intervals. Each contact produces a soft, predictable sound. The repetition helps maintain rhythm and awareness. The air is cooler now, and breath leaves the mouth in a faint trace that quickly disappears. Movement remains steady, without strain or hurry. This is the point where daytime responsibility has fully passed into night duty. The environment is stable. The town is enclosed. The remaining activity is minimal. The watchman's role becomes more visible precisely because so little else is happening. Presence itself serves as reassurance that the expected order of the night is in place. As the last of the outer light fades completely, attention turns from the streets themselves to the practical steps that prepare the watch for the long hours ahead. The transition is not ceremonial. It follows a pattern repeated so often that each movement feels familiar and efficient. Near the gate, or in a small guardroom set against the inner wall, the watchman pauses to gather what is needed before the deeper part of the night begins. Clothing is adjusted first. The air has cooled enough that the lighter comfort of the afternoon is no longer sufficient. A heavier cloak is drawn across the shoulders and settled so that it does not restrict the arms while walking. The fabric is thick and slightly coarse, made for durability more than ease or comfort. It holds warmth close to the body and dulls the sharpness of the night breeze that moves along the stone surfaces of the wall. The hood, if present, rests back for now. it is ready to be pulled forward when the temperature drops further. Beneath the cloak, simpler garments remain unchanged from the day's wear. They are practical and plain, chosen for movement rather than display or appearance. A belt at the waist carries small items that must remain close at hand. The weight is modest but noticeable, a constant reminder of responsibility rather than burden. Each piece has a known place so that it can be found without looking in low light. The staff, or in some towns, a short polearm such as a halberd, is checked for balance. Its purpose during most nights is not confrontation, but presence. The length allows it to be seen clearly in torchlight, marking the watchman's role to anyone moving through the streets. The wood is worn smooth where hands have gripped it over many shifts. A small adjustment of grip confirms that it sits comfortably, neither too loose nor too tight. A lantern is prepared next. The glass panes are inspected for soot from previous use. If needed, a quick wipe clears enough of the surface to let the light pass more evenly. The wick is trimmed with a practiced motion, short enough to avoid excess smoke, yet long enough to hold a steady flame. When lit, the lantern produces a contained glow that reaches only a few steps ahead. It does not remove darkness entirely. It simply creates a small, reliable circle in which details remain visible. Alongside the lantern, a simple signaling tool is kept ready. In some places, this is a small horn. In others, it is a wooden rattle designed to produce a sharp, carrying sound. The instrument is not used often, but its presence is required. It allows the watchman to call attention if assistance is needed, or to mark the passing of certain hours according to local custom. The object is tested briefly, not loudly, just enough to confirm that it functions as expected. Footwear is checked with equal care. Boots must remain secure, as the night involves long periods of walking over uneven ground. A loose strap or worn tie could become a distraction later when attention should remain outward. The soles carry the memory of many routes. Packed earth near the square, rougher stone near the gate, narrow passages where moisture sometimes gathers. Ensuring a stable fit reduces unnecessary fatigue over the course of the shift. Nearby, a small record of duty may be kept by the town authorities. This is not always a written ledger in the modern sense, but there is usually some form of acknowledgement that the watch has begun. A brief exchange with the gate attendant or another member of the watch confirms who is responsible for which portion of the walls and streets. The tone is practical and quiet. Names, routes, and expected intervals are stated without elaboration or ceremony. Responsibilities for the night are understood rather than debated. The watchman is expected to maintain a visible presence, to move through assigned paths, and to observe anything that appears out of place. He is not tasked with solving problems alone, but with noticing them early and signaling if needed. This distinction shapes the pace of the work. It favors steady movement and clear attention over any sudden action or dramatic intervention. The gate itself becomes a central point of reference. Once the doors are brought closed for the night, their condition must be checked at intervals. Hinges, bars, and locking beams are examined in the lantern's light. The metal shows a dull sheen where hands have touched it many times. A firm push confirms that the structure sits correctly in its frame. This simple verification reduces uncertainty later when darkness makes details harder to judge. As preparation continues, the surrounding sounds thin further. Indoor life remains behind walls, but outside the streets hold longer stretches of quiet. The watchman listens as he works, noting the difference between ordinary background noise and anything unusual. The low crackle of a nearby torch, the distant movement of an animal settling, the soft shift of fabric as the cloak is adjusted. All of these become part of a stable soundscape. The lantern is lifted and lowered once or twice to gauge how its light falls across the ground. Shadows move with the motion, stretching and shortening against the uneven surface. This brief test helps set a comfortable walking rhythm. Holding the lantern too high can tire the arm, too low, and the immediate path becomes harder to read. A middle position is chosen, one that can be maintained for long periods without strain. Cold begins to settle more firmly along the stone of the wall. When the watchman rests a hand briefly against it, the temperature difference is clear. The cloak is drawn closer across the chest, not as a dramatic gesture, but as a small, practical adjustment. Breath is slower now, matching the calmer pace of the town. There is no urgency in these movements. Preparation is meant to prevent the need for hurried corrections later in the night. Expectations from the town are simple and consistent. The watchman is a visible sign that the night is ordered and observed. Residents who might still glance from a window or step outside briefly recognize the outline of cloak, staff, and lantern. This recognition carries reassurance. It signals that the usual protections of the town remain in place, even as activity fades and most people retire indoors. Before leaving the preparation point, the watchman takes a final moment to confirm that each item sits where it should. Staff balanced, lantern steady, signaling tool accessible, cloak secure. These checks are brief but deliberate. They reduce the need to stop unnecessarily once the patrol is underway. Efficiency here supports endurance later when the hours stretch and fatigue becomes more noticeable. The first steps away from the gate or guard room mark the true beginning of sustained night duty. The lantern's glow moves with each stride, revealing a small section of ground, then the next. The staff touches down at regular intervals, producing a soft, rhythmic contact. This repeated pattern helps maintain focus and sets a pace that can be held without excess effort. Behind, the gate stands closed and quiet, its presence now part of the background structure of the night. Ahead, the streets lie in partial shadow, defined by memory, habit, and the limited reach of lantern light. Preparation has shifted into action without any sharp boundary between the two. The watchman's role continues through movement, observation, and the steady maintenance of order that the town expects after dark. The first full round begins once the town has settled into consistent darkness. The lantern's glow becomes the primary guide, revealing the ground a few steps ahead and the lower edges of nearby walls. Beyond that small circle, shapes remain soft and indistinct. The watchman moves at a measured pace, neither slow nor hurried, following the route that connects the gate, the market square, and the main crossings between narrower streets. Shops along the main street are now closed completely. Their wooden shutters are drawn tight, secured with simple bars or hooks. In the lantern light, the grain of the wood shows faintly, worn smooth in places where hands have touched it daily. Hanging signs that mark trade during daylight hours now rest still, their painted surfaces dulled by shadow. A slight movement may occur when a weak breeze passes, producing a quiet creak that fades quickly into the stillness. Doorways are passed one by one. Most are firmly shut. Some show a thin line of warmer light at the base, where indoor fires continue at a low level for cooking or warmth. The watchman does not pause at each house. Instead, he notes patterns. A door that appears as it did the night before receives only a brief glance. Anything slightly different draws a moment of closer attention. A latch sitting at an unusual angle, a shutter not fully closed. These small details are registered before he continues. Footsteps fall with a steady rhythm against packed earth and occasional stretches of uneven stone. The sound is muted but consistent, enough to announce presence without disturbing the quiet. The staff touches down at regular intervals, adding a second, softer beat to the movement. Together, these sounds create a predictable pattern that can be recognized from a distance by anyone still awake inside nearby homes. The market square lies ahead as a wider open space where the lantern's light seems smaller against the surrounding dark. Stalls stand as simple frames and covered tables, their shapes reduced to outlines. During the day, this area carries layered voices and movement. Now it holds a broad stillness. The watchman crosses along the edge rather than through the center, following the established path that keeps him near the buildings, where details are easier to observe. A faint sound from above interrupts the quiet briefly, a window being closed more firmly. The motion is ordinary, part of late household routines finishing after nightfall. No further noise follows. The watchman continues without stopping, registering the source and allowing it to settle back into the background of expected activity. At one corner, a wall-mounted torch burns with a low, steady flame. Its light flickers against the plaster and timber, creating slow-moving shadows that shift with the air. The watchman passes close enough to confirm that it is secure in its bracket and not casting sparks toward nearby wood. Satisfied, he moves on, leaving the torch to mark the turn for anyone who might pass later. Narrow side streets branch away from the main route. Their entrances appear as darker gaps between buildings. The patrol includes brief entries into some of these passages, especially those that connect important points such as wells or storage areas. Inside, the lantern reveals uneven ground and stacked items left from daytime use. Barrels, baskets, a cart pushed against a wall. Each object is familiar. Nothing appears recently disturbed. The air in these tighter spaces feels cooler and more still. Sounds from the wider street fade, replaced by the soft echo of footsteps against close surfaces. After a short distance, the watchman turns back toward the main path, ensuring that the passage remains quiet and undisturbed. These brief checks are repeated in several places, forming a pattern that will continue throughout the night. As the round progresses, more household lights go out. Windows that showed a faint glow earlier now sit completely dark. The change happens gradually, one home at a time. With each extinguished light, the streets rely more fully on lanterns and fixed torches. The watchman's own light becomes a moving reference point, briefly illuminating doorframes and thresholds before leaving them in shadow again. Near the inner wall, the outline of the gate is visible as a darker mass against the slightly lighter sky. The heavy doors remain closed, their surface catching only a dull reflection from the lantern when approached. A short pause allows the watchman to listen. No voices or movement come from beyond. The quiet suggests that the road outside is empty at this hour. After confirming that the locking beam sits properly, he resumes the route. Occasionally, a distant sound carries across the still air. A dog shifting in its place, the faint rattle of loose wood, the soft movement of an animal within a stable. Each noise is brief and without urgency. The watchman does not react with haste. Instead, he notes direction and character, distinguishing ordinary night activity from anything that would require closer attention. The pace remains consistent. Walking too quickly would shorten the time spent observing each section of street. Moving too slowly would extend the round beyond its intended interval. The chosen rhythm allows the same areas to be revisited at predictable times, reinforcing the sense that the town is under continuous watch rather than occasional inspection. At a familiar crossroads, the lantern is lifted slightly to cast light farther down each branch. The gesture is routine, performed every round. The beams of light fade quickly, revealing only the nearest stretch of ground and the lower parts of walls. No movement appears. The staff taps once against the earth as the watchman turns, continuing along the next segment of the path. The physical effort is steady but moderate. Muscles warm through repeated motion, offsetting some of the cooling air. Breathing remains even. There is no strain yet, only the awareness that many hours remain before dawn. This early portion of the night is often the easiest to maintain focus, as fatigue has not fully settled and the transition from day is still recent. Passing again near the market square, the stillness feels deeper than before. The earlier sounds of closing shutters and final errands have ended. The space now holds only the faint crackle of a distant torch and the soft movement of air across open ground. The watchman's footsteps briefly fill the quiet, then fade as he moves beyond the square's edge. The first round concludes not with a marked endpoint, but by returning to a familiar reference point near the gate. The route forms a loop designed to be repeated through the night. By arriving back where the patrol began, the watchman confirms that each key area has been observed once under full darkness. Nothing has changed in any noticeable way. Without pause for rest, the next round begins along the same paths. Repetition is intentional. It creates a steady presence that can be anticipated by anyone awake and provides regular opportunities to notice small differences if they arise. The lantern's glow moves forward again, tracing the edges of walls and doorways as the watchman continues into the deeper hours of the night. The night moves into a new rhythm now, one shaped by repetition rather than discovery. What had begun as exploration has settled into a fixed pattern. The watchman no longer charts unknown ground. Instead, he follows a course already established through habit, instruction, and the simple facts of the town's geography. His route connects a series of unchanging landmarks: the gate, the market square, the communal well, and the main intersections where streets converge. These points form a loop that can be completed in full, then started again from the beginning without pause. Memory guides each turn more than vision does. The lantern still provides its small pool of light, but the watchman has already learned where the ground slopes downward, where doorways press close to the edge of the street, and where merchants stack their goods in ways that make the passage narrower. This knowledge allows him to maintain a steady pace, even as the hours deepen and shadows thicken around him. The street between the gate and the square runs wider and straighter than most others in the town. Here, the watchman walks near the center line. His lantern casts light outward in both directions, reaching the buildings that stand on either side. Upper floors extend over the street below. Wooden beams and plastered walls catch the glow briefly as he passes, then fade back into darkness behind him. Nothing along this stretch requires him to stop. The purpose of the patrol is not to linger in any one place, but to be visible, to show that movement continues. When the route reaches the square, it follows the outer edge rather than cutting straight through the open center. This path keeps the watchman close to the surrounding structures, where doors, storage alcoves, and covered market stalls all demand periodic attention. The middle of the square remains untouched by light, left in shadow and stillness. Each time the loop brings him back to this place, the same sequence unfolds. He approaches, casts a slow glance across the empty space, then continues along the perimeter without breaking stride. From the square, the route narrows into two connecting streets that lead toward the inner wall. These passages demand a small adjustment in posture. The watchman raises his lantern slightly higher so that its light can reach past stacked barrels and the low-hanging edges of roof eaves. Footsteps sound different here. The packed earth softens the noise, and the close walls create a sense of enclosure. He listens as he walks, paying attention to how the echo shifts with each section of the street. At a small junction near the communal well, the route pauses just long enough for a habitual inspection. The wooden cover sits firmly in place. The bucket rests against the stone rim where it was left earlier in the evening. The rope hangs straight without signs of fresh fraying. These details are confirmed with a brief glance. Then the patrol moves forward again. The check is repeated during every round, not because anything is expected to change, but because maintaining consistency ensures that any real difference would be noticed immediately. As the watchman approaches the gate once more, the structure first appears as a darker shape against the night sky. The lantern reveals the lower portion: wood grain, iron bands, the edge of the heavy locking beam. A hand may rest briefly against the surface to confirm that everything remains firmly secured. No sound comes from the road beyond. The world outside the wall stays silent. With that confirmation made, the watchman turns back into the interior streets and begins the loop again. This cycle of repetition forms the foundation of the night's labor. The same sequence of streets, the same corners, the same familiar landmarks return again and again. Over time, the body begins to adapt to the rhythm. Steps fall into an even cadence. The staff meets the ground at intervals that become predictable. Breathing aligns with movement, steady and without strain. The routine removes the need for constant decision-making, which allows attention to remain focused outward on the environment. Small changes in the surroundings become easier to detect precisely because so much else stays the same. A shutter that moves slightly in the breeze, a loose sign that shifts once before settling back into place, or a faint shift in the way sound carries through a narrow passage. All of these stand out against the stable pattern. The watchman does not respond with urgency to these minor variations. Instead, he registers each one, confirms that it poses no danger, and continues forward. The lantern's flame needs occasional adjustment. A brief pause in a sheltered spot allows the wick to be trimmed or the glass to be cleared of fresh soot. These stops are short and functional. The goal is to keep the light consistent so that the next stretch of the route can be walked without difficulty. Once the flame steadies again, the patrol resumes at the same measured pace as before. As the night advances further, the air along the wall grows noticeably cooler than the air in the inner streets. When the route passes close to the stone, the difference can be felt on the face and hands. The cloak is drawn tighter across the chest, then allowed to settle back into place. Movement continues without interruption. The body generates enough warmth through walking to stay comfortable as long as the pace is maintained. Sound remains sparse and scattered across long intervals. The distant shift of an animal, the faint creak of timber adjusting to the cooler temperature, and the soft flutter of a torch in its bracket. All of these appear one at a time, then fade. Between these moments, there are long stretches where only footsteps and the light tap of the staff can be heard. This persistent quiet reinforces the sense that the town is resting as it should. At each crossroads, the same brief scan takes place. The lantern is angled slightly to the left, then to the right, revealing the nearest portion of each branching path. No extended search is necessary. The purpose is simply to confirm that the space remains undisturbed. After this quick glance, the watchman continues in the predetermined direction, preserving the timing of the loop. The repetition also serves a social purpose, even when few people are present to witness it directly. Any resident who wakes briefly during the night and listens from inside their home would hear the passing footsteps at regular intervals. The predictable return of that sound signals that the watch remains active. Presence is communicated not through announcements, but through rhythm. Physical effort remains moderate but continuous. Legs and shoulders carry a growing awareness of the hours that still lie ahead, though fatigue has not yet become heavy. The steady nature of the route prevents sudden strain. There are no abrupt climbs or rapid turns, only gradual transitions between wider streets and narrower passages. This design allows the patrol to continue for long periods without needing to stop. As another loop completes near the gate, nothing in the environment suggests that change has occurred. The doors remain secure, the square remains still. The side streets hold the same arrangement of shadows and quiet. The watchman turns once more into the familiar path, continuing the sequence that will repeat through the middle portion of the night. The work at this stage is defined less by new events and more by the act of maintaining continuity. Each round reinforces the one before it. Each step confirms that order persists. The lantern's glow advances a few paces at a time, then recedes behind, leaving the street as it was, quiet, enclosed, and undisturbed. As the night deepens further, sound becomes the most reliable guide to understanding the state of the town. With little movement visible beyond the lantern's narrow circle, the watchman's attention shifts more fully toward what can be heard rather than what can be seen. The streets hold long stretches of near silence, and within that quiet, even the smallest noises carry with unusual clarity. Wind moves first along the upper edges of the walls. It does not rush or produce sharp whistles. Instead, it passes in a low, steady flow that brushes against stone and timber. At times, it slips down into the streets below, stirring loose straw or dust across the ground. When it meets a hanging sign or an unsecured shutter, it produces a brief wooden creak, then fades again into stillness. These sounds repeat in familiar patterns, shaped by the physical layout of the buildings. Footsteps continue at a measured pace. The soft contact of boots against packed earth forms the most consistent rhythm in the environment. The staff touches down at regular intervals, adding a second, quieter note. Together they create a predictable sequence. Step, step, light tap. This pattern marks the watchman's position even when the lantern's glow is not visible from a distance. From within the houses come occasional muted noises that suggest the last layers of indoor life settling down. A log shifts in a hearth with a dull crack. A bench scrapes lightly as someone adjusts their position before sleep. These sounds are softened by walls and distance. They do not repeat often, and each one fades quickly back into stillness. Animals provide another layer to the night's soundscape. Somewhere within a stable, a horse shifts its weight, producing a slow, heavy movement against wood. A dog, resting near a doorway, may release a single low bark before settling again. Chickens or other small animals rustle briefly, then become quiet. None of these sounds carry any urgency. They are simply part of the expected background of a town at rest. As the patrol passes along a narrower street, the acoustics change. Close walls cause footsteps to echo slightly, returning a softened version of each step a moment later. The lantern's small movements also create faint sounds. The gentle clink of metal against glass. The subtle flutter of flame responding to air currents. These details become more noticeable precisely because nothing else competes with them. At intervals, the watchman pauses for a few breaths without fully stopping the patrol. In these moments, the absence of his own movement allows distant noises to emerge more clearly. A faint shifting from the direction of the fields beyond the wall may be heard, likely caused by night animals moving through grass. The sound remains far away and indistinct. After a brief listen, the steady walking resumes. The gate area carries its own distinct tones. Wood under tension produces a slow, almost imperceptible creak as the temperature drops. Iron fittings rest against their brackets with a dull, unmoving weight. When the wind reaches this structure, it moves across flat surfaces and edges, creating a low, hollow murmur that differs from the softer sounds within the inner streets. The watchman recognizes this difference and notes that it remains consistent with what he has heard on previous nights. Occasionally, a loose object responds to the air. A length of rope brushes against a post, or a hanging latch taps once against wood. These sounds are brief and isolated. Their irregular timing stands out, but their character is familiar enough that they do not suggest concern. The patrol continues with only a slight turn of the head to confirm the source. Further along, near the well, the environment becomes notably still. The stone structure absorbs and dampens much of the surrounding noise. Here, even the watchman's own breathing seems more pronounced for a moment. The lantern's flame burns steadily, producing only a faint, constant whisper. After passing this point, the wider street allows ambient sounds to return. The night air itself carries subtle variations. When the wind shifts direction, it brings different, distant tones with it. Perhaps the faint movement of branches outside the wall, or the soft rustle of thatch on a roof. These changes are gradual. They do not interrupt the overall quiet, but add gentle texture to it. The watchman listens without altering his pace, letting each sound register and pass. From time to time, another member of the watch may be heard at a distance, marked by a similar pattern of steps, or the brief shake of a rattle used to signal presence. The sound is faint and separated by space, confirming that other routes are being covered. No direct interaction is needed. The awareness that another patrol is active contributes to the sense of maintained order. As the hours move forward, the intervals between sounds grow longer. The town settles more deeply into rest. Torches burn lower, producing a softer crackle. Indoor fires diminish, reducing the occasional shifting of wood. Animals become still. In this quieter phase, the watchman relies on his memory of the usual sound patterns to recognize anything that does not belong. When a new noise appears, a short scrape from a side passage, or a brief flutter of movement near stacked goods, the response is measured. The lantern is angled slightly toward the source, revealing only stationary objects and familiar shapes. With no further sound following, the patrol resumes without delay. The goal is to confirm, not to escalate. The steady rhythm of walking continues to anchor the night. Step, step, light tap. The sequence repeats through each stretch of street, echoing softly where walls are close and fading where space opens. Over time, this pattern becomes almost indistinguishable from the background itself, another constant element of the town's nighttime environment. Breathing remains even, matching the pace of movement. The cool air carries each exhale away quickly. Clothing shifts softly with each stride, producing a faint rustle beneath the cloak. These small personal sounds blend with the wider quiet rather than standing apart from it. By the middle portion of the night, the soundscape is defined less by individual events and more by the spaces between them. Long, uninterrupted stretches of stillness become the dominant experience. Within those stretches, the watchman listens for anything that breaks the pattern, a sustained movement, repeated tapping, or voices where none are expected. None persist. The patrol continues along the established loop, guided as much by these subtle auditory cues as by sight. The town remains enclosed, calm and largely silent. Each familiar sound, wind against timber, a distant animal settling, the quiet contact of staff against ground, confirms that the night is proceeding in its usual ordered way. As the night advances, occasional movement from other people still appears, though less frequently than in the earlier hours. These encounters are brief and restrained, shaped by shared expectations about how the town should behave after dark. The Watchman continues along the established route, and when another figure enters the lantern's limited circle of light, both parties slow slightly to acknowledge one another's presence. Most often, it is a late traveller who has arrived just before the gates were closed and is now moving between lodging and the street. Their steps are careful on the uneven ground. A cloak is usually drawn close, both for warmth and to signal that the day's activity has ended. When the lantern reveals their face, recognition is not always personal, but the outline of the Watchman's staff and cloak clearly marks his role. The exchange is simple and quiet. A few low words confirm purpose and direction. The traveller may state where they are staying or indicate the building they seek. The Watchman listens, gives a brief nod, and gestures with the staff or lantern toward the correct turn if needed. There is no extended conversation. The goal is clarity rather than familiarity. Once direction is understood, both continue on their separate paths. At times, a resident steps outside briefly, perhaps to secure an animal, check a latch, or empty a small container near the doorway. These actions are performed quickly, with an awareness of the late hour. When the Watchman passes, the resident offers a short acknowledgement, sometimes only a glance or a quiet greeting. The response is equally minimal. Presence is confirmed without interrupting the calm of the street. Near the market square, an inn door may open for a moment, releasing a warmer light and the muted sound of low voices inside. A guest arriving late is admitted. Then the door closes again, returning the square to shadow. The Watchman does not approach unless called. Observing from a short distance is sufficient, ensuring that the activity remains orderly and contained within the expected place. On certain rounds, another member of the watch crosses a nearby street, visible only for a few steps as lantern light overlaps. The two acknowledge each other with a brief nod or a quiet word. No long discussion follows. Each continues along the assigned route, maintaining coverage without leaving gaps. The encounter lasts only seconds, but reinforces the shared structure of the night's duty. When movement is heard before it is seen, the Watchman adjusts the lantern slightly forward. Footsteps approaching at a steady pace usually belong to someone with a clear destination. The sound of hesitant or uneven steps may prompt a slower approach, allowing the light to reveal the person without surprise. In most cases, the figure is simply a resident returning from a late task or moving between nearby buildings. If a cart is encountered within the walls at this hour, it moves slowly and without load. Wheels produce a soft rolling sound against the ground. The driver keeps close to the side of the street to allow the watchman to pass. A short exchange confirms that the movement is local and expected, often related to stable work or preparing for early morning trade. Once acknowledged, both continue without delay. Social expectations shape these interactions. After dark, voices remain low, movements deliberate, and time outside is kept brief. The watchman's role is not to question ordinary necessity, but to notice anything that falls outside the usual pattern. Most encounters fit comfortably within what the town considers normal nighttime behavior. Occasionally, a window opens above the street, and a resident looks down to identify the passing light. Seeing the familiar outline of the watchman, the window is closed again without words. This small exchange, though silent, confirms mutual awareness. The patrol continues, footsteps fading as the lantern moves beyond the building. Near storage areas or workshops, a worker finishing a late task may secure a door or adjust a shutter. The watchman pauses just long enough to observe that the closure is complete. A brief nod passes between them. No instruction is needed. The shared understanding is that these final tasks conclude the day's responsibilities. In some stretches of the route, no one is encountered at all for several rounds. The earlier presence of travelers or residents diminishes as the night grows deeper. When a person does appear after a long, quiet interval, the contrast is noticeable but not alarming. The same calm process repeats. Light revealing a face, a few quiet words, then separation. These brief meetings serve to maintain the social fabric of the town during hours when most people rest. The watchman's visibility reassures those still awake that the streets remain observed. At the same time, the restrained manner of each exchange preserves the stillness needed for the night to remain undisturbed. Body language remains measured throughout. Movements are slow, hands visible, posture upright but relaxed. The staff is held as a marker of role rather than threat. The lantern is angled to illuminate the ground between both parties, reducing uncertainty without casting harsh light into faces. After each encounter, the street returns quickly to silence. Footsteps recede, doors close, and the lantern's glow once again becomes the only moving light. The watchman resumes the established pace, rejoining the familiar loop that connects the key points of the town. Over time, the number of interactions decreases further. The inn door stays closed. Windows remain dark. No more late errands appear. The patrol continues through spaces that now hold only the memory of earlier movement. The absence of people becomes the new norm, and any future encounter would stand out clearly against that quiet. For now, the final brief exchanges of the late evening settle into stillness. The watchman proceeds along the route, maintaining presence through steady motion, while the town withdraws fully into rest behind closed doors. The patrol moves forward with attention now turning in a more deliberate way toward the small responsibilities that help keep the town settled as night deepens. These tasks carry no drama or urgency about them. They are quiet checks, repeated at regular intervals, meant to confirm that the ordinary precautions taken at dusk are still holding. The watchman follows his familiar loop, allowing each stop to fall in the same order it did before. Doorways along the main street are observed with greater care now that nearly all the indoor lights have faded away. The lantern is angled toward latches and hinges, its glow revealing whether these fittings sit flush against the wood as they should. Most doors remain firmly closed, their surfaces still and showing no sign of disturbance. A loose bar here, or a shutter left slightly ajar there, will draw a brief pause. The watchman does not force entry or make noise that might wake the household. Instead, he notes the condition in his mind, ensures that nothing is moving with the wind, and then continues onward, trusting that the household will set things right at first light. Shutters along the upper windows are checked from below, as far as the limited light will allow. Their outlines reveal whether they are properly secured or gently shifting in the night air. When a shutter rests as it should, it sits flat against the frame without producing any sound. If it moves, the motion tends to be slow and caused by the air passing through the narrow streets. The watchman listens carefully for any repeated tapping that might suggest a loose fastening in need of attention. Most, however, remain quiet and stable. Near the storage buildings and workshops that line certain streets, exterior bars and simple locks are examined as the patrol passes by. The lantern's glow falls across each piece, revealing the position of metal, resting where it should, and wood aligned properly with the frame. These structures often hold tools or goods left behind from the day's labor, and checking their condition forms part of the nightly routine. A steady glance is usually enough to confirm that nothing has been disturbed since the previous round. At the market square, the covered stalls receive this same quiet attention. Cloth coverings are checked for any signs of being lifted by the wind. Ropes appear taut, their knots holding just as they were tied earlier in the evening. The watchman walks the perimeter at a pace slow enough to see each section clearly without breaking the rhythm of the patrol. The open center of the square remains undisturbed, a wide, dark space bordered by shapes that stand still and silent. Fire represents a constant concern in any town built largely of timber and thatchers, so points of open flame are observed with particular care. Wall-mounted torches are approached close enough to confirm that their brackets hold the flame firmly, and that sparks are not falling toward dry material below. The lantern is kept slightly back to avoid mixing light sources or disturbing the flame with sudden movement. If a torch burns low, it is generally left as it is, unless local custom requires replacement during the night. Most are allowed to fade naturally as the hours progress toward morning. Where a faint glow shows through a doorway or a window, the watchman takes note of whether it appears controlled, like the steady light of a banked hearth, or exposed, like an unattended lamp that might pose a risk. The difference is subtle, but becomes familiar with experience. A steady, low light that does not flicker strongly suggests a fire set intentionally for warmth through the night. No action is needed in such cases. The patrol continues once this impression has been confirmed. At the gate, the responsibilities take on a more structural character. The heavy beam that secures the doors is checked again, this time by touch as well as by sight. The wood feels cold and solid beneath the hand, reassuring in its weight and stability. Iron fittings remain fixed in their brackets, showing no sign of movement. The lantern is lifted slightly to examine the lower hinges where moisture can sometimes gather and cause rust over time. Everything holds in the same position as it did during earlier rounds. The watchman also takes a moment to observe the ground near the gate for any fresh marks that might suggest recent activity. In the lantern's limited reach, the surface shows only the older impressions left before the gate was closed for the night. Cart tracks, footprints softened by time and weather. No new disturbance appears in the dirt. After a short pause to listen for any sound beyond the doors, the patrol turns back toward the interior streets and continues along its established path. Water sources receive periodic attention as well, as they represent both a practical resource and a potential point of vulnerability. At the town well, the cover remains set firmly in place, protecting the opening from debris or accident. The bucket and rope hang where they were last seen, undisturbed and ready for morning use. The watchman does not handle these items unless something appears out of order. A steady look is usually enough to confirm that the area is secure and has not been tampered with. Maintaining order also involves making a visible presence at key crossings throughout the town. The watchman pauses briefly at these points, allowing the lantern to cast light in both directions down the intersecting streets. The act is simple in itself. Stand, listen carefully, observe what can be seen, and then move on. Even without anyone present to witness it, the pause reinforces the pattern that these spaces are being regularly watched and that order is being maintained. Sound continues to guide many of these checks as much as sight does. A loose latch will produce a faint, repeated tap as it moves. A poorly tied covering will rustle more than the steady wind alone would suggest. When such noises appear, the watchman steps closer to the source, using the lantern to reveal what is causing the disturbance. Most often, the cause proves to be minor. A shifting rope or a piece of wood settling as temperatures drop through the night. Once the source has been identified and judged harmless, the patrol resumes without need for further adjustment. The body moves through all of these tasks with a practiced efficiency that comes from repetition. Each check is kept brief, never lingering longer than necessary to confirm what needs confirming. The goal is to maintain momentum so that the full route can be completed and then repeated on the expected schedule. Shoulders remain relaxed beneath the weight of the cloak, and the grip on the staff stays steady and sure, conserving energy for the many hours that still lie ahead. Social order during these night hours is supported not by confrontation or force, but by visibility and steady presence. Even when no one is present to see the watchman pass, the act of moving past each doorway and crossing each square reinforces the expectation that the town is under watch. Any resident who might wake briefly and listen in the darkness would hear the familiar pattern of steps and know that the routine continues unchanged, just as it does every night. Between these small responsibilities, the patrol returns to its quiet rhythm. Step, step, and the light tap of the staff. The lantern's glow shifts steadily across surfaces of wood and stone, then moves onward, leaving each place exactly as it was found. Nothing tonight requires intervention beyond simple observation. The town remains closed, secured against the night and holding to its expected calm. As another loop brings the watchman back toward the gate once more, each point previously checked appears in the same condition as before. Doors remain shut tight. Shutters rest flat against their frames. Torches burn lower without scattering sparks into the surrounding darkness. These repeated confirmations build a steady sense that the night is holding to its expected order, that all remains well within the walls. Without pause or ceremony, the next round begins again along the same sequence of streets and familiar landmarks. The responsibilities themselves do not change from one round to the next, only repeat. Through this steady repetition, small details across the town remain under quiet supervision, while the rest of the population continues to sleep soundly behind closed walls and shuttered windows. As the night moves past its middle hours and deeper into the stretch before dawn, the steady routine continues without break. Yet the physical and mental weight of the long shift becomes more noticeable with each passing round. The streets themselves remain largely unchanged, but the body begins to register more clearly the length of time already spent walking these same paths over and over. The watchman maintains the established pace as best he can, knowing from experience that slowing too much can allow both cold and fatigue to settle more deeply into muscles and mind. The air has cooled further as the night has aged. Stone surfaces along the wall now release a persistent chill that spreads gradually into the narrow streets that run beside them. When the patrol passes close to these sections, the difference in temperature becomes immediately clear on exposed skin, on the face and hands. The cloak is drawn tighter across the chest for a moment, then allowed to fall back into its usual position, so that arm movement remains free and unrestricted. These small adjustments are made almost without thought, without breaking stride or disrupting the rhythm of walking. Fatigue appears gradually rather than arriving all at once in a sudden wave. Legs feel heavier during the longer stretches between familiar landmarks, and shoulders carry a dull awareness from holding the lantern and staff for so many hours without rest. The watchman responds to this growing tiredness by keeping his movements as economical as possible. Steps remain even and measured, avoiding unnecessary turns or shifts in posture that might waste energy. The goal now is simply to preserve what strength remains so that the same route can be repeated again and again without strain or faltering. Darkness at this stage of the night feels more complete than it did earlier. The earlier glow from a few scattered windows has disappeared entirely, and most of the fixed torches mounted along walls have burned considerably lower. The lantern's circle of light now stands out as the primary source of moving illumination through the streets. Beyond its limited reach, the streets and buildings merge into a uniform shadow, where details are known more by memory and habit than by any visible features. Familiar corners and doorways are recognized by their shape and position in the overall layout of the town, rather than by features that can actually be seen. Maintaining alertness through these long, quiet hours requires steady, continuous attention, rather than occasional bursts of concentrated focus. The watchman listens carefully to the established pattern of sounds that the night produces. The wind moving along timber walls, the occasional shift of an animal settling in its enclosure, the quiet, rhythmic contact of boots against packed earth. These repeated cues form a kind of baseline, a normal background against which anything unusual would stand out. Anything that might interrupt this established pattern would be easier to notice precisely because of the consistency that surrounds it. Cold air affects breathing in subtle ways, making each inhale feel sharper and more present than it did earlier in the night. Exhaled breath shows as a faint trace before fading quickly into the surrounding darkness. The rhythm of walking helps keep warmth circulating in the body, so pauses are deliberately kept brief whenever possible. When a stop becomes necessary, such as when checking the gate beam or observing a crossing point, it lasts only a few moments before the patrol resumes its forward motion. The mind works steadily to remain alert, despite the monotony of repeating the same route for so many hours. One round can begin to blur into the next when there is so little variation to mark their passing. To counter this natural tendency, the watchman makes small mental notes as he passes familiar points. This shutter sits flush with its frame. That rope remains properly taut. The well cover is unchanged from the last time it was observed. These quiet confirmations provide a kind of internal structure and help maintain awareness of time passing, without the need for any external signal or marker. Uncertainty is present, but remains subdued and manageable. Darkness always limits how far the eye can see clearly, and distant shapes sometimes appear larger or closer than they actually are when viewed in poor light. The watchman responds to this by relying on his knowledge of the usual distances between landmarks and familiar objects. A shadow that does not quite match the usual outline of a cart or a barrel will receive a slightly longer look under the direct light of the lantern. Most of these uncertain shapes resolve into familiar, harmless objects once they are approached more closely. The wind shifts occasionally as the night progresses, moving through different streets with varying intensity depending on the layout of buildings and walls. In one narrow passage, it may be barely noticeable, while in another more open area, it presses more firmly against the cloak and creates a steady resistance. These changes alter how sound travels through the town, sometimes carrying a faint noise from farther away than would normally be expected. The watchman pauses briefly when this happens, listening carefully to determine the source, then continues once the sound proves to be something ordinary and harmless. Hands grow noticeably cooler where they hold the staff and the lantern's handle. A small adjustment of grip every so often allows fingers to flex slightly and helps maintain circulation against the cold. The wood of the staff feels smooth and cold under the palm, a constant physical reference point that grounds the experience. The lantern's handle warms just slightly from the flame burning below, offering a modest contrast that helps reduce stiffness in the fingers that hold it. The repetition of the patrol continues to serve its intended purpose despite the monotony. Returning to the same gate, the same market square, and the same narrow passages over and over provides a steady reassurance that no area of the town has been left unchecked or unobserved. Each completed loop confirms once again that the town remains in its settled nighttime state, even without any visible change occurring. The simple act of confirming this stability forms an essential part of the watchman's duty. Sound remains sparse across the town during these deeper hours. Long intervals pass where only the sound of footsteps and the soft tap of the staff against ground can be heard. In these stretches of near silence, the watchman's awareness widens naturally, listening intently for anything that might break the established quiet. A brief rustle near some stacked goods, or a single knock of wood against wood somewhere in the darkness, is enough to draw the lantern's light in that direction for a closer look. When nothing further follows, and the source proves harmless, the patrol returns smoothly to its steady rhythm. The body's internal sense of time tends to slow slightly during these deeper, darker hours of the night. Without the natural markers that daylight provides, and without frequent activity to break up the passing minutes, time itself can feel stretched and longer than it actually is. The watchman measures his progress not by any visible clock or timepiece, but by the familiar sequence of landmarks encountered on each round. Gate crossing, well, market square. This ordered, repeating path prevents the night from becoming formless and helps maintain a sense of forward movement even when everything else seems still. Despite the growing fatigue, the fundamental responsibility to remain present and alert does not lessen in any way. The staff continues to meet the ground at its regular intervals, providing both rhythm and reassurance. The lantern remains held level to avoid creating uneven shadows that could obscure the path ahead or make familiar objects appear strange. Shoulders stay squared and posture remains upright enough to support steady, even breathing. These physical habits, maintained through conscious effort, help sustain alertness without requiring any sudden expenditure of energy. As yet, another round brings the patrol past the market square once more. The stillness there feels deeper than it did at any earlier point in the night. No voices drift from nearby homes. No doors shift on their hinges. No late movement of any kind disturbs the space. The opened square seems to absorb sound rather than reflect it, leaving only the faint whisper of wind across its surface. The watchman crosses along the edge as he has done many times before, maintaining exactly the same route without any deviation. Approaching the gate again, the structure appears unchanged from the last inspection. The beam remains properly set. The hinges rest quiet in their fittings. The ground shows no fresh disturbance. A brief touch of the hand confirms that the wood remains firmly in place, cold and solid. The lantern light traces along the lower edge once more, revealing the same familiar details, then moves away as the patrol turns back toward the interior streets to continue the established route. The various pressures of the long night, cold, darkness, repetition, and fatigue, remain steady but still manageable. They form a constant background to the work, rather than an escalating challenge that threatens to overwhelm. By keeping movement regular and consistent, and by maintaining attention directed outward toward the streets and structures, the Watchman sustains the routine that carries the town safely through these quiet, vulnerable hours. The loop continues without interruption. Each step reinforces the same measured pace that has been maintained since the beginning of the shift. Each brief check confirms the same settled order that has held throughout the night. The darkness maintains its depth, unchanging, and the patrol moves steadily within it, marking time and presence without disturbance. The hours immediately before dawn arrive gradually, marked less by any visible change in the sky and more by a deepening stillness that settles across the entire town. Movement that appeared occasionally during earlier portions of the night has now faded almost entirely away. The streets hold long, uninterrupted stretches of quiet where even the familiar background sounds become faint and widely spaced. The Watchman continues along his established route without variation. The lanterns glow, moving steadily through spaces that feel completely settled and at rest. The air reaches its coldest point during this period just before morning. Stone along the walls releases a persistent chill that lingers heavily in the narrow passages that run between buildings. The ground beneath each step feels noticeably firmer now, having lost entirely the mild warmth it still held after sunset many hours ago. Breath leaves the mouth in a thin, pale trace that becomes briefly visible before disappearing quickly into the surrounding darkness. The cloak remains drawn close around the body, not pulled tightly, but settled enough to preserve the warmth that continuous walking has generated over the long night. Lantern light appears somehow softer against the darkness at this hour, its small circle of illumination surrounded by a uniform shadow that reveals few details beyond the most familiar outlines. Doorways, corner posts, and the edges of buildings are recognized mostly by their known position in the layout of streets, rather than by any clear features that can actually be seen. The Watchman's pace remains even and steady, guided more by his memory of the distances between landmarks than by sight alone. Sound has been reduced to its simplest, most essential elements. The rhythm of footsteps and the quiet contact of the staff against ground provide the most consistent pattern. Wind has eased in many streets, leaving only an occasional faint movement along the higher edges of roofs or along the top of the town wall. animals that shifted and moved in their places earlier in the night are now completely still. No voices carry from within any of the houses. The town rests fully and deeply behind its closed doors and shuttered windows. At the market square, the open space feels even wider in the complete absence of any activity or movement. The lantern's light reaches only a short distance across the open ground before fading entirely into shadow. The covered stalls remain as silent, still shapes, their cloth coverings completely unmoving in the calm air. Crossing along the familiar edge of the square, the watchman notes no change whatsoever in the arrangement of objects or in the overall atmosphere. The stillness here feels uninterrupted and complete, stretching from one side of the square all the way to the other. Near the town well, this same profound quiet persists without variation. The rope hangs perfectly straight without any motion. The bucket rests against stone, producing no sound at all. Even the faint echoes that could sometimes be heard earlier in the night are now subdued, absorbed completely by the calm, still air. The watchman pauses for a brief moment to listen carefully, then continues forward once the silence itself confirms that nothing is out of place or requiring attention. The gate stands as a dark, steady presence against a sky that is beginning to lose just a hint of its complete depth. The change is extremely subtle, not yet approaching anything that could be called light, but perhaps slightly less opaque than it was an hour before. The lantern reveals the lower portion of the gate as it has all night long. Wood grain, iron bands, the edge of the securing beam. A hand rests briefly against the cold surface, feeling the same solid stability as in all the previous rounds. No movement or sound comes from beyond the closed doors. Time during these final hours before dawn feels particularly extended, measured entirely by the sequence of repeated paths rather than by any visible signal from the sky or from the town itself. Each return to a familiar corner or landmark confirms that another portion of the night has passed, that another round has been completed. The watchman maintains his attention by continuing to perform the same checks he has made all night long. Doors remain closed. Shutters rest properly against frames. Coverings sit secure. Each observation is completed quickly due to the complete lack of any change or disturbance. Fatigue is certainly present, but remains steady and manageable, held in a kind of balance by the continued motion of walking. Muscles carry a dull heaviness that does not seem to increase as long as the pace remains consistent and even. Breathing stays regular, and posture remains upright enough to keep the lantern held level and the path ahead visible. There is no need for any sudden effort or exertion, only the quiet, patient endurance that comes naturally from many hours of steady repetition. The sky above the rooftops begins to show the very faintest shift toward a lighter tone, though stars remain clearly visible overhead. This change is so gradual that it would be easy to miss entirely, unless it were watched carefully over the course of several rounds. The watchman does not alter his route or his pace in response to this subtle shift. The patrol continues exactly as it has been maintained throughout the night, preserving the structure and rhythm that has carried the watch successfully this far. In the narrower streets that run between buildings, darkness still holds firmly and shows no sign of weakening. The lantern's glow moves across familiar door frames and past stacked goods and equipment, revealing the same positions and arrangements as it did hours earlier. No new sounds arise from these passages. The complete absence of any disturbance becomes its own form of confirmation that the town remains secure and undisturbed as morning slowly approaches. At each crossroads along the route, the usual brief pause occurs just as it has all night. The lantern is angled deliberately to the left, then to the right, casting its limited light down each intersecting street. Only empty stretches of ground and quiet walls appear in both directions. The watchman resumes his path without any delay, allowing the familiar rhythm of steps and the soft tap of the staff to continue marking his presence through the sleeping streets. The air feels perhaps slightly less sharp and biting as the first genuine hint of approaching morning begins to reduce the absolute depth of night. The change remains subtle, sensed more in the way shadows seem to soften ever so slightly than in any clear increase of actual light. Torches that have burned steadily through the earlier hours have nearly faded completely by now, leaving behind only faint embers or thin threads of smoke rising into the darkness. The lantern remains the primary and most reliable source of illumination along the entire route. Another complete loop brings the patrol past the market square and then toward the gate once more. The same deep stillness persists without any variation. No late travelers approach from the road beyond. No windows show any light or movement. No doors shift or creak. The town holds a quiet that feels settled and peaceful, rather than tense or uncertain. A profound calm that comes from many hours passing without any interruption or disturbance. The watchman continues walking steadily forward, allowing the established pattern to carry on. Step, step, and the light tap of the staff. This rhythm moves through the final stretch of the deepest night hours. Each pass through the familiar sequence of landmarks confirms that the long, quiet hours are gradually nearing their natural end, even though the streets themselves have not yet shown any visible change or awakening. The sky continues its slow, almost imperceptible transition overhead. The patrol remains completely unchanged in response to it, maintaining the same measured pace, performing the same brief checks at each important point, and listening with the same careful attention as the town rests in the last calm interval before the return of morning light. As the night finally begins to thin and the first pale light starts to rest, gently along the rooftops and the upper edges of walls, the watchman's steps grow perhaps slightly slower and more deliberately measured. The streets he has walked continuously for so many hours now feel familiar in a quieter, deeper way, as if the town itself has been holding its breath throughout the long darkness. Doors remain firmly closed, windows stay shuttered and still. The last few lanterns that burned through the night fade one by one, while the sounds of early morning begin their gradual appearance. Distant carts moving somewhere beyond the walls. A rooster calling from a farmyard. These sounds begin slowly to take the place of the night's profound silence. With the gates checked one final time and the last round of the night completed, the duty passes gently and naturally from night watch into the beginning of day. The watchman leaves behind a town that has rested securely under his steady, patient presence throughout the dark hours, unchanged and undisturbed. As daylight settles more firmly across the stone and timber of buildings and walls, the rhythm of ordinary daily life begins to return gradually to the streets. The long, patient work of the night slips quietly into memory, already fading as the town wakes. But it will return again, as it always does, when evening comes once more.